The lace of the veil felt heavy, suffocatingly so, as Talia stared at her reflection in the full-length mirror of the bridal suite. It was a masterpiece of tulle and ivory silk, the very definition of a dream wedding dress, but her chest was heaving so violently that the delicate fabric strained against her ribs. In her right hand, she gripped her phone, the screen slick with the sweat of her palms. A notification flashed, a single text from her maid of honor, Sera, that read simply, "Please tell me you haven't checked the account yet." Talia's thumb hovered over the banking app, her heart hammering against her teeth like a trapped bird. She knew that clicking it would change everything. She knew that looking at the numbers would either cement her future or burn her entire life to the ground. If you want to know how a love story turns into a crime scene, make sure to subscribe to the channel right now, because the truth of what happened in that room is something nobody saw coming. Talia took a deep breath, her finger trembling as she tapped the screen, unaware that the real horror wasn't the number she was about to see, but the legacy of a lie that had started over a decade ago. To understand how Talia ended up suffocating in silk 3 weeks before her wedding, you have to look at the foundation of her life in Chicago. Talia Cross was 28 years old, a brilliant and meticulously organized graphic designer who lived her life by deadlines, grids, and precise color palettes. She was a woman who didn't believe in loose ends. For 3 long years, she had budgeted every single cent, skipping vacations, packing lunches, and working late-night freelance gigs to build what she called the Forever Fund, a combined savings account meant to pay for a beautiful wedding at a historic downtown venue and serve as a down payment for a condo in Lincoln Park. Talia was pragmatic, fiercely independent, and utterly devoted to the man she was marrying. That man was Dominic Rossi. At 29, Dominic, or Dom as everyone called him, was the golden boy of the neighborhood. A high school history teacher and varsity basketball coach, he had a smile that could melt the winter frost off Lake Michigan. He was charismatic, beloved by his students, and possessed an easygoing nature that perfectly balanced Talia's anxious perfectionism. They were the couple everyone rooted for, the high school sweethearts who had actually made it. Then there was Serafina Lynn, known to everyone as Sera. Sera was Talia's childhood best friend, a sharp-witted 30-year-old forensic accountant who wore designer power suits like armor. Sera was the kind of friend who handled the heavy lifting of life. She could fix a broken spreadsheet, spot a liar from a mile away, and manage a crisis without breaking a sweat. Or so Talia thought. The trouble didn't start with a massive explosion. It started with a whisper. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon, exactly 21 days before the ceremony, when Dante Silva, Talia's senior coworker at the design firm, walked into her cubicle. Dante was an observant man, the kind of colleague who noticed when people changed their perfume or wore a mismatched sock. He looked uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot before leaning over Talia's desk. "Hey, Talia," Dante began, his voice lowered. "I saw something last night, and I've been debating all morning whether to tell you. I don't want to cause drama, but if it were my fiancé, I'd want to know." Talia had laughed, spinning around in her ergonomic chair. "Dante, Dom is currently losing his mind over seating charts. What could he possibly have done? I was at that upscale lounge on Dearborn last night around 10 p.m., Dante said, his eyes locking onto hers with intense seriousness. "I saw Dom. He was tucked into a back booth with Sera. Talia, they weren't just having a casual drink. They were arguing intensely. At one point, Sera grabbed his phone, and it looked like she was trying to delete something. He grabbed her wrist to stop her, and they were so close their foreheads were practically touching. It looked remarkably intimate. And when they left in separate Ubers, looking like they'd just committed a crime." Talia's laughter died in her throat. The air in the cubicle suddenly felt thin. She forced a smile, thanking Dante for his concern and dismissing it as a misunderstanding about wedding planning. But as Dante walked away, a cold drop of dread dripped down her spine. Why would Dom and Sera be meeting in secret at a lounge downtown when Dom had told her he was at a mandatory coaches meeting and Sera had claimed she was pulling an all-nighter for a corporate audit? Talia stared at her computer screen, the bright colors of her latest design project blurring together. Little did she know, this small seed of doubt was about to blossom into a poison that would infect every corner of her reality. That evening, the atmosphere in Talia's apartment was suffocatingly tense. Dom was sitting on the couch, reviewing game footage on his laptop, looking completely normal, completely innocent. Talia watched him from the kitchen island, her fingers tightening around a glass of water. "Hey, babe," she called out, trying to keep her voice casual. "Did you ever get that text from Sera about the final caterer headcount?" Dom didn't look up from his screen. No. I haven't talked to Sera in a few days. Why?" The lie was smooth. It didn't ripple his face or change his posture. Talia felt a physical ache in her chest. Later that night, while Dom was asleep, his phone vibrated on the nightstand. Talia, who had never once looked through a partner's phone in her life, found her hands moving on their own. She picked it up, her heart hammering. The screen lit up with a preview of a message from an unsaved number, but beneath it, a string of archived notifications from an encrypted messaging app caught her eye. She couldn't unlock the phone, but the banner previews she could see were damning. "We can't keep doing this behind her back," one read. Another, from a week prior, said, "Meet me at the usual spot. Bring the documents." Talia replaced the phone, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped it. The evidence was stacking up into a towering mountain of betrayal. Her fiancé and her maid of honor, the two people she trusted more than life itself, were keeping a massive, active secret from her. The late-night texts, the secret meetings, the easy lies, it all pointed to one devastating conclusion. As she lay awake in the dark, listening to the steady breathing of the man she loved, Talia felt her world fracturing. She was completely unaware that the nightmare she was constructing in her mind was actually a merciful fantasy compared to the bleak reality of what was truly happening. The next morning, Talia's mother, Beatrice Cross, arrived at the apartment under the guise of helping with the wedding favors. Beatrice was a formidable woman in her late 50s, heavily invested in the social capital of this wedding. To Beatrice, appearances were everything. The $50,000 wedding wasn't just a celebration. It was a statement to the community that the Cross family was thriving. As they folded silver ribbons around small boxes of truffles, Beatrice noticed Talia's pale complexion and dark circles. "You look dreadful, Talia. Is everything all right with the venue?" "Everything is fine, Mom," Talia lied, her voice tight. "Just stressed." Beatrice sniffed, adjusting a ribbon with practiced perfection. "Well, make sure you keep an eye on Dominic, and honestly, on Serafina too. I've always thought that girl was a bit too comfortable around your fiancé. She has that aggressive corporate attitude, and men like Dominic can be easily overwhelmed by women like that. Just be careful, darling. People aren't always who they pretend to be." Her mother's words, usually easily dismissed as traditional paranoia, felt like a prophecy. Talia couldn't take it anymore. The ambiguity was killing her. She called Sera, her voice forced into a cheerful pitch, and asked if they could meet for lunch at a quiet bistro near Sera's downtown office. Sera agreed immediately, sounding completely normal, which only made Talia's stomach turn more violently. When Talia arrived at the bistro, Sera was already seated, looking impeccable in a charcoal blazer, typing furiously on her tablet. When she saw Talia, her face lit up, and she stood up to hug her. Talia felt a wave of nausea. How could someone hug you so warmly while stabbing you in the back? They ordered, and for the first 10 minutes, Sera chatted amiably about the bachelorette party logistics and flower arrangements. But Talia wasn't listening. She was watching Sera's hands, watching the way her eyes darted to her phone every time it buzzed. Finally, Talia couldn't play the game anymore. She reached across the table and placed her hand over Sera's phone. "Sera, stop," Talia said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Sera blinked, her professional smile faltering. "What's wrong, Tals?" "Dante saw you and Dom at the Dearborn Lounge 2 nights ago," Talia said, the words cutting through the restaurant's ambient noise like a knife. "He saw you arguing. He saw you reaching for his phone. Dom lied to me about where he was. You lied to me about where you were. I saw the encrypted texts on his phone last night, Sera. Look me in the eye and tell me the truth. Are you sleeping with my fiancé?" Sera's reaction was instantaneous, but it wasn't the guilt-ridden panic Talia expected. Instead, Sera's face drained of all color, her jaw dropping as a look of sheer, unadulterated horror washed over her features. She looked around the restaurant frantically, then reached out and grabbed Talia's hands, her grip surprisingly tight. "Talia, oh my God, no, 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 no," Sera whispered frantically, her voice trembling. "I am not sleeping with Dom. I swear to you on my life, on my mother's life. I have never and would never look at him that way." "Then why are you meeting him in secret?" Talia demanded, tears finally spilling over her lashes, her voice rising enough to make a nearby diner turn their head. "Why are you texting him behind my back? Why is he deleting messages from you?" Sera closed her eyes, a heavy, exhausted sigh escaping her lips. When she opened them, the sharp, confident corporate accountant looked entirely broken. She reached into her leather briefcase, pulled out a thick manila folder, and slid it across the table toward Talia. "Because," Sera said, her voice barely audible over the clinking of silverware around them, "the truth is so much worse than an affair." Talia stared at the folder. Her hand shook as she reached for it, her fingers gripping the paper edge. She flipped it open, expecting love letters or hotel receipts. Instead, her eyes fell upon bank statements, spreadsheets, and legal documents. There were rows upon rows of numbers highlighted in aggressive neon yellow. "What is this?" Talia asked, her brain refusing to process the data. "Dom has a disease, Talia," Sera said, leaning in close, her eyes brimming with a fierce, protective sorrow. "And it's a disease that's been eating away at him since high school. He's a compulsive sports gambler." The words hung in the air, heavy and absurd. Talia looked from the documents to Sera. "Gambling? Dom? He plays fantasy football, Sera. Everyone does." "It's not fantasy football," Sera said bitterly. "It started in high school with local bookies. Back then, it was a few $100s here and there. He came to me because I was good with numbers, because I could help him balance his cash flow and hide it from his parents. I thought he grew out of it in college, but when the state legalized online sports betting apps a few years ago, it was like throwing gasoline on a fire. He has dozens of accounts. He's been betting on everything from overseas table tennis to college basketball. And he's been losing. Massively." Talia's mind was spinning, the room tilting slightly. "But what does that have to do with you? Why are you guys meeting in secret now?" Sera took a deep, shaky breath. "Because 3 weeks ago, Dom came to me in a complete panic. He had hit rock bottom. He owed a private bookmaker $20,000, and the guy was threatening to come to his school, to ruin his career, and to call you. Dom knew that if you found out, the wedding was over. He begged me for a loan. He knew I had the savings." Sera reached out, squeezing Talia's hand tighter. "Talia, I didn't do it to enable him. I did it because I love you. I knew how hard you worked for this wedding. I knew how much this day meant to you, how much you loved him. I thought if I bailed him out one last time, forced him into a strict repayment plan, and made him sign a promissory note, I could save your wedding day and give him time to get into rehab after the honeymoon without ruining your life beforehand. The night Dante saw us at the lounge, I was forcing him to sign the legal agreement. He didn't want to do it. He was throwing a tantrum, and I was trying to grab his phone to delete the gambling apps myself. That's what you saw. It was never an affair, Talia. I was trying to save your future." Talia sat frozen. the noise of the bistro fading into a dull, distant hum. The relief of knowing her best friend wasn't sleeping with her fiancé was instantly crushed by a wave of cold, heavy dread. She looked down at the financial statements in the folder. Dom owed Sera $20,000. It was a staggering amount of money, a terrifying secret. But as Talia's eyes scanned the detailed analysis Sera had compiled of Dom's known accounts, a cold sweat broke out across her forehead. Sera was a forensic accountant, brilliant with numbers, but she only had access to the data Dom had willingly given her. She only knew about the debts he had confessed to. Talia's mind suddenly flashed to her own financial structure. She thought about the Forever Fund, the joint account they had created 6 months ago for vendor deposits, the account she had placed all her hard-earned savings into, giving Dom full administrative access so he could handle the contracts while she worked her grueling freelance hours. Talia looked up at Sera, her face completely expressionless, her voice dead and hollow. "Sera, if you loaned him $20,000 to pay off his bookie, why did he need to access our joint wedding account last week?" Sera frowns, her analytical brain immediately catching the terrifying implication. "What do you mean? He told me the wedding account was untouched. He said he just needed my loan to cover the private debt so the wedding money could stay safe." Talia didn't answer. She pulled her phone out of her purse, her hands moving with a terrifying, robotic precision. She opened her banking app. She logged into the joint Forever Fund account. The screen loaded. The balance, which should have been sitting at a comfortable $50,000, comprising Talia's $35,000 life savings and Dom's supposed $15,000 contribution, was displayed in stark, unyielding black numbers. Balance: $1,420.68. Talia stared at the screen. The numbers didn't make sense. She tapped on the transaction history. Over the past 3 weeks, there were dozens of electronic transfers, disguised with labels like Midwest Catering LLC, Floral Design Deposits, and DJ Entertainment Group. But when Talia looked closer at the routing numbers listed beneath the custom labels, they didn't belong to vendors. They belonged to online betting platforms and digital wallets. Dom hadn't just lost his own money. He hadn't just taken a massive loan from Sera. He had systematically, ruthlessly drained Talia's entire life savings. Every late night she had worked, every sacrifice she had made for their future home, had been converted into digital tokens and thrown into a black hole of addiction. Talia felt a sensation like falling from a great height. The world didn't just tilt, it shattered into a million jagged pieces. She looked at Sera, who was watching her with growing alarm. Talia held up the phone screen. Sera gasped, covering her mouth with her hand, tears springing into her eyes. "Oh my God, Talia, I'm so sorry. He told me it was clean. He lied to me too." Talia didn't cry. The grief was too massive, too heavy to manifest as tears. It hardened instantly into a cold, diamond-sharp anger. She stood up from the table, leaving her coat behind, ignoring Sera's frantic calls as she walked out of the restaurant and into the bustling, indifferent Chicago streets. She walked for hours, her mind operating with a terrifying clarity. The man she was supposed to marry in less than 20 days was a stranger, a thief, a master manipulator who had used her love and her labor to feed a monster. When she finally returned to their apartment late that afternoon, Dom was sitting at the kitchen island, chopping vegetables for dinner. He looked up, his face lighting up with that beautiful, golden boy smile that had captured her heart a decade ago. "Hey, you're back late. How was lunch with Sera?" he asked, his tone perfectly light, perfectly normal. Talia walked into the kitchen, her movements slow, deliberate. She took the manila folder Sera had given her, along with a printed statement of their drained joint account, and slammed them onto the counter right next to the cutting board. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet apartment. Dom looked down at the papers. Talia watched his face change. In a matter of seconds, she saw the entire trajectory of his emotional defense play out across his features. First came confusion, then recognition, followed by a flash of anger, and finally, a profound, hollow defeat. The smile vanished, replaced by the pale, haunted face of a man whose sins had finally caught up with him. "Talia," Dom whispered, his voice cracking. He dropped the knife, his hands trembling. "I can explain." "Explain what, Dom?" Talia said, her voice terrifyingly calm. "Explain how you've been lying to me since high school? Explain how you turned my best friend into your financial co-conspirator? Or explain how you stole $35,000 of my hard-earned money and threw it away on football games?" Dom sank onto a kitchen stool, burying his face in his hands. He began to weep, deep, chest-heaving sobs that sounded pathetic to Talia's ears. "I'm sick, Talia. It's an addiction. I didn't want to do it. Every time I bet, I thought I'd win it back. I thought I could replace your savings before you ever noticed. I wanted to give you the perfect wedding, the perfect house. I did it for us." "Don't you dare say you did this for us," Talia roared, her composure finally breaking, her voice shaking the walls of the apartment. "You did this for you. You stole my future, Dom. You stole my security. You let me work myself to the bone while you were gambling away our life." For the next 2 hours, the apartment was a battleground. Dom begged, pleaded, and fell to his knees. He promised to go to Gamblers Anonymous that very night. He offered to turn over all his accounts to her, to let her control every cent he made for the rest of his life. He reminded her of their 10 years together, of the love they shared, of the family they wanted to build. And then the front door opened and Beatrice Cross walked in, having used her spare key. She had heard the screaming from the hallway. When Beatrice saw the papers on the counter and her future son-in-law on his knees, crying, she demanded to know what was happening. Talia, exhausted and hollowed out, told her mother everything. She expected Beatrice to be furious, expected her to help her pack her bags. But as the truth laid itself bare on the kitchen counter, Beatrice's expression didn't turn to anger. It turned to a calculating, rigid panic. Beatrice looked at the financial statements, then at Dom, and then at Talia. "Talia, look at me," Beatrice said, her voice sharp and commanding. "The invitations went out 2 months ago. The caterer is paid. The historic venue is booked. 500 people are expecting a wedding in 2 weeks. Your father's colleagues, our neighbors, the entire community, everyone is coming." "Mom, he stole my life savings," Talia screamed, disbelief washing over her. "The money is gone." "Then he will pay it back," Beatrice snapped, her face set in stone. "Dominic is a good teacher. He has a good salary. You will draft a legal contract, you will take his paychecks, and you will rebuild the fund. But you cannot cancel this wedding, Talia. Do you have any idea what the scandal would do to this family? The gossip, the embarrassment? People will think he left you, or that we are bankrupt. We will proceed with the ceremony, save face, and you can deal with his little sickness privately as husband and wife." Talia stared at her mother, feeling a profound, sickening sense of isolation. The 2 people who were supposed to protect her, the man she loved and the woman who gave her birth, were both asking her to sacrifice her soul to maintain an illusion. Dom was begging her to save him from himself, and Beatrice was begging her to save her from social embarrassment. Just then, the phone on the counter buzzed. It was a text from Sera. Talia picked it up, expecting another apology, but instead, it was a screenshot of a legal notification. Sera had added a text beneath it. "Talia, I'm so sorry, but I couldn't keep covering for him." The bookmaker Dom owed money to? He didn't just threaten Dom. He used Dom's school email to send a harassment complaint to the school board. Dom's principal just called me as a character reference. They are suspending him, pending an investigation into illegal gambling on school property. The story is going to break in the local news tomorrow. The room seemed to lose all oxygen. Talia looked at Dom, who was still weeping on the floor, completely unaware that his professional life had just collapsed around him. The illusion of saving face was gone. The contract her mother wanted to write was useless. Dom wouldn't have a salary to garnish. Talia looked down at her fiancé, the boy she had loved since she was a teenager, the man who had systematically dismantled her life piece by piece. She looked at her mother, who was staring at her with desperate, pleading eyes. Talia realized she was standing at a precipice. She could walk down that aisle in 2 weeks, put on the beautiful ivory silk dress, wear the heavy veil, and step into a marriage built on a foundation of theft, deceit, and public ruin. She could spend the rest of her life checking bank accounts, looking over her shoulder, and wondering if the next phone call would be a bookie or a police officer. Or she could walk away right now, lose the $50,000 wedding, face the whispers of the neighborhood, and start over at 28 with absolutely nothing but her dignity. Talia took a long, deep breath. The anger in her chest subsided, replaced by a cold, absolute clarity. She didn't say another word to Dom. She didn't look at her mother. She walked into the bedroom, pulled her suitcase out from under the bed, and began to pack. As she walked out the front door of the apartment, leaving her keys on the counter next to the ruined Forever Fund statements, Talia didn't look back. The dream wedding was dead, but as she stepped out into the crisp Chicago air, she realized that for the first time in 3 weeks, she could finally breathe.